Available now. Link below.
In a stunning turn of events, a senior editor from one of America's most liberal mainstream media outlets has come forward as a whistleblower exposing the network's pervasive anti-Trump bias and activist agenda. Uri Berliner, a 25-year veteran of National Public Radio, has blown the whistle on the taxpayer-funded organization's shocking transformation from objective journalism to partisan activism, and now Congress is reacting. In this explosive report, we'll dive deep into Berliner's revelations, which shed light on NPR's relentless efforts to undermine President Trump and push debunked Russia collusion narratives and deliberately ignore the Hunter Biden laptop scandal to protect Joe Biden during the 2020 election. You won't believe the extent of the fake news and bias that Berliner exposes within NPR's own ranks. So stay tuned for this eye-opening expose that reveals the truth behind the media's troubling shift and the implications for American journalism in an era of deepening political divisions. Now, in an era where government agencies like the IRS and the VA are arming themselves, it's crucial to stay informed and resilient. Just as NPR's whistleblower exposed the network's bias, we must shed light on the FDA and WADA's efforts to restrict access to testosterone, a natural supplement that supports health and strength. Black Forest Supplements is offering a special deal. Buy 2 bottles of testosterone and get 1 free. This limited offer allows you to stock up on a supplement that promotes well-being in the face of increasing control. Visit blackforestsupplements.com/news today to take advantage of this opportunity. Just like Uri Berliner stood up against NPR's bias, we must stand together to maintain our health and autonomy in these challenging times. You'll find the links in the description. Now, Uri Berliner, a senior editor at National Public Radio, has come forward as a whistleblower, exposing the government-funded network's pervasive bias and concerted efforts against former President Donald Trump. In a revealing conversation with Barry Weiss on her podcast, The Honestly Pod, Berliner shed light on NPR's transformation into a knee-jerk activist and scolding newsroom with a rigidly progressive agenda. Now, Berliner, who had worked at NPR for 25 years and continues to do so, noted a significant shift in the organization's approach during the Trump administration. He stated that NPR, like many legacy media outlets, was shocked and distraught by Trump's victory in 2016, as they had assumed Hillary Clinton would win. Now, this revelation, according to Berliner, exposed NPR's disconnect from the American people and their concerns. Now, in a striking admission, Berliner revealed how NPR's newsroom was overtaken by Trump derangement syndrome after the 2016 election. He explained how the media uncritically pushed the baseless Russia collusion theory in an effort to damage President Trump. So let's take a look at what he had to say. Watch.
Everyone knew that NPR had a liberal bent. It was like saying these days, like Fox has a conservative bent. That was obvious to anyone. But you argue that it's really gone from having a liberal bent or a liberal shading to really a bias. Here's one thing you write in your essay. You write, for the majority of your time at NPR, despite the liberal bend, an open-minded, curious culture prevailed. We were nerdy, but not knee-jerk, activist, or scolding. Uri, when did that start to change? When did the thing that everyone sort of recognized as sort of a liberal bias start to shift into something harder than that, into what you call a knee-jerk, activist, and even scolding quality?
Well, I think it was cumulative. I don't think it was one event. I mean, I think part of it was Trump's election. You know, I think like every newsroom, every legacy media newsroom, we were shocked, disturbed, distraught, really troubled. We assumed Hillary Clinton was going to win, and she didn't, and it was really an unsettling experience. But I also think, to me, it revealed that we didn't really understand a lot of what was going on in America, that we were out of touch. But I think also we kind of locked down after a while. I think after a while we started covering Trump in a way that like a lot of legacy news organizations, that we were trying to damage his presidency, to even find anything we could to harm him. And I think what we latched on to was Russia collusion, like a lot of news organizations, which was, as I write, sort of catnip, although it was just rumors and a lot of it based on pretty shoddy documents or evidence. It wasn't really solid, but I think it was compelling. And for us, you know, I think a lot of newspapers, use documents or anonymous sources. We really latched on to Adam Schiff. He was like our muse to the Trump collusion story. We had him on constantly, a lot. I think I counted 25 times. And in most of those conversations, he sort of alluded to evidence he may have had or sort of teased out, Russia, he was colluding, or the campaign was colluding with Russia. And then the Mueller report came out and no collusion. And, I think we sort of the story kind of disappeared. But to me, that was like a time for what went wrong? Why did we miss this? Despite our feelings about Trump, this is a story we should have sort of treated differently.
You think? Now, Berliner criticized NPR's reliance on dubious sources and narratives, including frequent collaboration with individuals like Adam Schiff, whose claims of collusion were later debunked by the Mueller report. Despite the lack of evidence, NPR persisted in highlighting these allegations throughout Trump's presidency. Now, the senior editor's critique also extended NPR's handling of the Hunter Biden laptop story, which the network largely ignored, citing concerns about inadvertently benefiting Trump. This decision, Berliner argued, reflected a broader pattern of bias and a shift in NPR's workplace culture, where identity and race have taken precedence over journalistic integrity. In his essay, I've been at NPR for 25 years, Here's How We Lost America's Trust, he provided additional insight into NPR's choice to ignore the Hunter Biden laptop story just weeks before the 2020 presidential election. He explained that despite the laptop's newsworthiness, NPR's natural journalistic desire to pursue a compelling lead was being suppressed. He recounted a meeting where he heard one of NPR's most respected and impartial journalists express satisfaction over the decision not to cover the laptop story as it might have benefited Trump's campaign. Now, his revelations paint a disturbing picture of a media organization that's abandoned its commitment to objective journalism in favor of partisan activism. In that exclusive interview with Barry Weiss, he spoke about the shift that he witnessed at NPR, with journalists increasingly prioritizing their personal sense of justice over fairness and objectivity. Take a look.
I came up under old school journalistic rules. You don't donate to campaigns. You don't march on behalf of political causes. A lot of the journalists I looked up to have never voted in an election because they understand that we are subjective people, that we all have our biases, but they want to maintain as much objectivity as possible. And I was looking at Instagram stories the other night, and I noticed a writer that I always read in the New Yorker, with her baby at a anti-Israel protest, waving a Palestinian flag. And I'm like, wow, that's just going to color the way that I read her stories, seeing that. And, that has just become something that is now extremely normative among legacy journalists. And it's a shift that I think is actually quite profound.
I totally agree. I mean, I think that there are a lot of journalists now who feel like they are obligated to do stories that are aligned with their sense of justice or to try and undo power structures. And if that means forgetting about the traditional values of fairness or objectivity, so be it, as long as the objective is to change the world in the way that these journalists want. To me, I think the idea, I'm probably an old-fashioned fuddy-duddy, but what we do in journalism is we have our opinions and we have our outlook, but we try and park them to the side. That's basically the starting place for the job. I mean, I think of the Sebastian Junger, a great quote about journalism. He said, genuine journalists are willing to destroy their opinions with facts. And I think we see the opposite now often, is that opinions push the story and that facts are ignored if they're inconvenient or they undermine the narrative.
Wow. Now, the senior editor also discussed how the death of George Floyd in 2020 sparked an activist rather than journalistic response within the NPR newsroom. He noted that instead of using the event as a starting point for objective reporting, NPR set a tone that aligned with a specific narrative. Let's see what he had to say about this.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about how things heated up at NPR following the killing of George Floyd. And you write this. You write that NPR's former CEO, a guy called John Lansing, encouraged sort of an activist mentality in the newsroom. He wrote this in a note to staff. When it comes to identifying and ending systemic racism, we can be agents of change. Listening and deep reflection are necessary, but they're not enough. They must be followed by constructive and meaningful steps forward. I will hold myself accountable for this. Now, lots of CEOs, not just at news organizations, but lots of corporate CEOs were putting out very similar statements at the time. Some went even further than Lansing does in that note. But tell me about why you decided to include that in the essay and why that kind of statement from the head of a news organization, especially like NPR, surprised you.
Look, it's understandable. These are incredibly painful, awful times, and the murder was horrific. And it was understandable, I think, that he would have that perspective expression. But, ultimately, when you look back on it, it's a pretty big thing to say that America is infected with systemic racism. That's a big deal to say that. And I think it would have been the right time to investigate that. To what extent is America infected with systemic racism, whether it's in housing or law enforcement or education? This, that would be a great starting point for reporting, looking for evidence, figuring out, is this true? Is it not true? Is it to what extent? But I think sort of a tone had been set instead.
Now, as whistleblowing has shed light on the growing challenges facing journalism in an era marked by deep political divisions, as NPR grapples with its declining ratings, low levels of trust, and an increasingly less diverse audience, the future of the organization appears uncertain. In his essay, he concluded by emphasizing the need for a public institution where stories are told and viewpoints are exchanged in good faith. He argued that while defunding NPR is not the answer, the network must address its missteps and biases from within, starting with the basic building blocks of journalism. And following Berliner's reflections on the importance of a public institution that genuinely promotes diverse narratives and good faith dialogue, the debate about national public radio takes center stage. Representative Doug LaMalfa's fiery speech on the House floor captures the intensity of the discussion, highlighting a stark discrepancy within NPR's editorial team. 87 registered Democrats, no Republicans. LaMalfa raises alarming questions about the network's impartiality given its substantial public funding. And his critique extends beyond mere numbers, delving into NPR's treatment of significant political and societal events, accusing the media outlet of perpetuating bias and neglecting journalistic integrity. Watch this from the House floor earlier today.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So, in the D.C. Newsroom for National Public Radio, which is the central hub for NPR's coverage of politics and news, it just came out that they have amongst their staff 87 registered Democrats in their editorial positions and 0 Republicans. 87 to 0. Now, Joe DiMaggio's hitting streak was amazing at 56 games in a row. Pete Rose in the 70s at 44 games in a row. 87 to 0. Now, I suppose, should it matter what the political makeup of people are in these positions? Not really, I guess, in a real sense. We're not talking reality in Washington, D.C., are we? We're not talking about a non-biased media that covers this place, that covers what politicians do, and the slant that people are going to hear it when they're out there in their cars, their homes, or wherever, picking this up in the various forms of media. So what do we know about NPR? It receives funding from the taxpayer and tries at the same time to be claiming to be objective. It receives it via the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, which the CPB, receives about $525 million of taxpayer dollars. About 50% of their funding. The other half comes from corporate donations, the same corporations that Democrats love to say evil things about, but oftentimes these days are doing bad things. So it's pretty hard to figure out where they're coming from. But what we've seen in recent years in reporting is a strong bias against Republicans and conservatives coming out of NPR, Corporation for Public Broadcasting, when they cover the political front here. The bias against anything that's not a far left view is clear. In fact, the bias of NPR is so clear that even a left-leaning editor in their organization, is where this came out, is raising alarm about the clear and consistent bias. This person is very concerned about it and is now being dismissed. NPR has already issued many statements and articles dismissing the critique, including this morning, without any admission by NPR or acknowledgement of any wrongdoing or bias, and certainly they have no intent to reform or even reflect upon what this looks like and sounds like. Let us remember that NPR embraced the Russiagate conspiracy theory without question, and they dismissed the Hunter Biden laptop story without proper scrutiny. All these things have been proven otherwise, haven't they? They also have NPR actively working to dismiss and attack information about the true origins of the COVID-19 virus, as well as the early treatments could have probably saved and helped many lives when they dismissed ivermectin and other forms, instead calling it horse paste, when as recently as 2015 it won a Nobel Prize for the amazing work they did with ivermectin. In the last decade, NPR's own audience has shrunk and become more intensely left-wing, gradually pushing out conservative listeners with nonstop ideological programming, bias in reporting, and injecting far-left ideas into previously non-political programs. So it's not just that quirky little radio station you hear in a musty bookstore or at a used record store or something like that. It's taken a really hard twist to the left. They claim to be neutral on a public platform to consider all things and consider all perspectives, but unfortunately it isn't that way anymore. They're desperately burning up their own credibility to try and keep up with the demands of the far left in its ranks that continue to shift farther and farther left. That's what this person on their organization came out and said. For 25 years, they have lost the American people with this shift. Pretty sad. So perhaps instead of calling it National Public Radio, it should be called National Progressive Radio, the term Democrats on the far left use for themselves. Though I've never really seen where the word progress fits in with some of the programs and ideals coming from the so-called progressives. NPR being funded by taxpayer dollars is a serious betrayal of the public trust. The American taxpayer should no longer be subsidizing this propaganda, which fails to even pretend to be unbiased anymore, and is appealing to a smaller and smaller group of people, unfortunately. Too bad, because the idealism of it years ago it was created looked a heck of a lot different and was indeed something everybody could find enjoyment in. I yield back.
NPR's top news executive Edith Chapin defended the network's journalism and commitment to diversity in response to criticism from their senior editor. Chapin rejected Berliner's assessment, emphasizing the importance of inclusion in staff, sourcing, and coverage, and she encouraged vigorous newsroom discussions to best serve the public interest. If you got value from this report, tap subscribe. My final thought is next. Folks, the revelation that a senior editor from NPR, one of America's most liberal mainstream media outlets, has come forward as a whistleblower is nothing short of groundbreaking. Uri Berliner's decision to expose his own network's virulent anti-Trump bias and activist agenda takes immense courage and integrity, and he didn't hold anything back, revealing the depths to which NPR sank in their efforts to undermine President Trump and push false narratives. This is a moment of truth for American journalism, and it's about time someone from the mainstream media had the guts to stand up and speak the truth. Berliner's whistleblowing is a wake-up call for all of us, reminding us that we must remain vigilant in our pursuit of honest, objective reporting. In an era of fake news and partisan activism masquerading as journalism, it's reassuring to know that there are still some journalists out there with some integrity. Congratulations, you made it to the end of the video. Now keep up your quest for truth with this next news report. And if you found our channel enlightening, join the millions who agree with you. Tap subscribe. Thank you for watching the Next News Network.